Okay, so in our last discussion, we discussed lesson plan for कौन सी स्केल का हमने डिस्कस किया था, if you could remember? Is anyone? There's some network problem. आप लोग को मेरी आवाज नहीं आ रही?
सर आ रही है आपकी आवाज।
Okay, तो क्या डिस्कस किया था हमने हमारी लास्ट सेशन में?
Sir, a framework for planning a listening skills lesson.
Okay. So did we complete that topic, or just we have to finish it first and then start a new one? Okay. So let's go to screen share and see that what we got. There it is. So can you see this screen on your mobile phones or your computers?
Yes, sir.
Okay, good. So framework for planning a listening skill lesson, this we have discussed, and these steps you can very much see that there was like a basic framework consist of this pre-listening, while listening, and then post-listening. So now we are going to our next topic, and that next topic is speaking lesson plan, right? That if you want to, in a language class, that ESL, English as second language, what should be the speaking lesson plan? And there are like 7 steps which could see on your screen as well. The first is set the context. Number 2 is deal with meaning. Third is work on forms for pronunciation work, controlled practice, freer practice, and homework. It's optional. So let's discuss these 7 steps one by one. The number 1 obviously is very much important whenever you are teaching even literature or a language class, whatever. Setting the context is very much important, because if you don't set the context, then obviously student will not feel comfortable, and it may be possible that it would be impossible for them to connect with the topic that what you want to say. There are different techniques which you can say, and then particularly when it is a speaking lesson, so you have to be very much sure that you get feedback from your students, and you practically actively involve them in the discussion, because obviously as it is a speaking lesson, so as much students are speaking about the topic and as much they are generating ideas of the relevant topic, it would be important. This obviously is a theory, right? It's not a practical kind of thing, but it's a theory. It tells you certain important steps which you can utilize in your teaching of this speaking class, right? So I'm just going to read this, and then I'll be explaining as well that what should be, for example, a thing. For instance, let me give you an example that if you're going to teach grammar to your students, or if you're going to teach poetry to your student, right, in a class, so you should be like setting up the context. Setting up the context is like preparing minds of the students for what you are going to teach, instead of directly loading them, directly telling them that you have to, that this is the topic and this is what we are going to study. You have to like understand it very well. And then whenever we talk about this these skills, these language skills, we need to understand one basic idea, and that basic idea is this: that it is very convenient to teach language, and it is very easy to teach language on the pattern as we have learned language. For example, we have learned this language, we know a language, for example, is our Urdu or our mother tongue, for instance. And how we have learned that language, we have learned that language on the pattern of, for example, first of all, we started to listen, right, as the first skill which we discussed in our previous section. And then we started to speak. So how we started to speak, obviously when we listened, we identified the words, right, and we identified their meanings. We identified that these words actually related with these things, and then we started to say those words. And then at the next level, when we went to school, we started to read things. We started to now identify the alphabets and the letters and the words and the sentences, and then we started to read about that. And then obviously fourth step is writing. So this whenever there is a topic, obviously for instance you are going to teach past tense to your class, right? So you can give your students some idea that okay, someone should tell that what they did, for example, in vacation, or what how they spent their time in that particular time frame. In this way, when they would be talking about their routine, they will be telling you the time of their that how they spend their time. So you would be like preparing their minds. So this is called the setting the context, right? So if we read from here, as you see that at the beginning of the lesson, you need to set the context. You'll want to do this because teaching language without giving students a situation, a reason to use it in isn't that helpful. However, by setting the context, it takes the content from just random new stuff into something far more concrete and useful. You can set the context in a few different ways, but an excellent way is to get students to talk with their partner for a couple of minutes about a certain topic. It is best if you give them a challenge of some kind, such as think 5 reasons why we are doing this thing, or tell your partner about the last time you went to some place. So in this way, when the students are talking, right, so they may be feeling hesitant in the beginning, but obviously with the passage of time, uh, so they would be like, they will not feel that much hesitant, right? So this is like obviously very much important kind of thing. And then obviously don't control the language they use, but use it as a kind of warm up to activate any of their previous knowledge, right? So obviously you need not to be like correcting their mistakes, or you not to be like focusing on like everything. It is like a warm up kind of thing, and we want that they should be speaking. The first thing obviously which you will feel like in our English class is that there's the shyness, the hesitance, right? Because we feel hesitant a bit when we want to speak in some other language, right? Though maybe we can be expert speaker as well, but still we find that obviously we know that our audience is of a different sort, and maybe whatever we are speaking, it will be not be understandable to all of them. So we have to like focusing on this thing. That's why whenever you are in a class and you're teaching your students, you must use it like whatever they are speaking, even if they are speaking wrong. So you're not supposed to correct them everywhere, right? So this and that. Then elicit some answer from students at the end of this time. An advanced level teaching move is to kind of steer the conversation in what you are teaching that day. So slowly you can steer them into the topic which you are going to teach that day, starting from their conversation, starting from their experiences, starting from their understanding of things. So this is something which is obviously very interesting. And then, for example, pick out grammar and vocabulary that the students used which you are going to teach. Remember, for all lesson plans to see the context. This is by far the best way to make an ESL lesson more memorable. And of course, you will want to keep your learners' need in mind during this stage, along with all the others. So again, this is obviously very much important that uh, that we should be like we should be considering our students. This is the most important thing, because student is the most important thing in the class. In a typical or conservative mindset, it is considered that maybe teacher is the central place in the class. But in ESL, or in this modern outlook, we see that the student is the main center of attention, and we should be like considering the level of our students as well. We should be considering that how can we can increase their level, and how can we manage all those things. We will discuss this in detail as well in our class dynamics topic. But at this point, it is like very much clear that you must set your context first, and then second, obviously you will be starting from students as actively when they are participating in this lesson. whatever you're going to teach, it would be very much easy for them to understand that particular topic. So that's why one thing which is obviously very much important is set the context in your lesson plans. And how can you set your context? By involving students in that teaching activity, right? Because student is obviously the center of that attention, and you're going to improve students skills. So that's why as much participation and as much time you give to students, it would be very easier for them to learn. Look, for a teacher, it is very much easy that he or she comes and deliver a lecture and just leave the class, considering that he or she has done his job. It's very easy kind of thing, right? Even for example, a teacher come into class and he may just deliver a hi-fi kind of lecture, and that will be one way kind of teaching, because in this particular kind of teaching, teacher may have impressed you, but the teacher has not actually cared for your needs. As a good teacher, particularly, and then as a teacher of language, especially, you have to consider that what is your class? I mean, what is the level of your students? How, for example, you can individually improve them, right? Obviously, there are a bunch of people in the class, and you have to like devise such strategy as you should be like interacting with everyone as much as it is possible. Obviously, if the class is big class, for example, you can make groups, you can make group leaders, you can give them activities, you can give them certain assignments, you can ask for certain presentation, right? So in this way, they will be like actively participating and learning collectively as well. So this is like this point which must, for example, as I often say that maybe many of you are going to be in teaching field in your life if you get the chance. So you should be having these things in your mind, that when you're going to teach English, obviously English is not our first language, it is a second language. And mostly people, they might be having certain ideas in their mind, they might be having certain skills in their mind, they might be even very intelligent, but supposedly that if they are having that language barrier, to let that language barrier not make them feel that they are somewhat lacking, right? So language is a skill, right? And intelligence or your ability is obviously your talent. So talent, it should be considered superior. So the second step, the first step, whenever you're teaching a class, you set the context in your lesson plans, right? Whatever you're going to teach, that how, for example, you're preparing the minds of your students. And this is obviously a very simple activity which we all do in our real life situations. For example, in our real life situations, if you have to ask some money from your father, right? So you set a context, right? When you want to ask some friend for some favor, you set a context, right? The setting up a context is actually is a process in which we prepare the mind, right? Okay, so now coming to second step, deal with meaning during ESL lesson plans, right? So obviously that how you're going to deal with meaning, obviously when you are teaching ESL, right? English as a second language. So obviously you got to explain the meaning of the words to your students, the meaning of the concepts which you are teaching to your students, and you have to obviously code switching, that you'll be switching from their first language and then obviously into second language. Some audiovisual aids could be used, right? So different things which, for example, you can use so that they may be understanding that second language from a very good point of view. So as we read, introduce the language, as for example, grammar or vocabulary more explicitly at this point, but don't get all caught up in the nitty gritty details of form, but instead focus on the bigger picture. So whenever you're teaching second language, always your strategy should be from general to specific. It's not that you're going to in the minor details, in the delicate details. You need not to, like I say, that you need not to go over there, but you have to focus on the bigger picture. When can you use this language and what does it actually means? If you say XYZ, for example, if I were introducing too short tall, I could show some pictures of people wearing clothes that don't fit and ask what the problem is. They're too short, it's too small. So these are kind of things which you can utilize. These are the things. Similarly, or if your lesson is about the simple past, right? If you are teaching your class past tense, for example, you could get students to talk about some things they did on their summer vacation. They will obviously have to use verbs, and you could big picture highlight some of the past form they used. Expect mistakes with negative form, etc., but don't look too closely at it yet. Remember, it is all about student-centered classrooms, right? Again, as I said, that the focus should be on the student, because in the language classes, we want our students to learn it, and they can only learn it when they're going to have this experience. If you're not giving your students proper experience, it will not be possible for them to learn about language. This is obviously very important point, which I'm going to make, that if you just go to class and you just even you use audio visual aids, you use, for example, whiteboard, and you write so many things, and you just deliver a very good lecture, but if you have not actively involved your class into this, right, then obviously it would be very mundane kind of situation, which is obviously not useful. So there you can see that you can expect mistakes as well from your students, all right, because obviously this is how they learn, and you can ask questions all the way. So come to step number 3, and this is ESL speaking lesson plan work on forms. At this point, right, when, for example, you have set the context, you have told them the meaning, right? So in the third point here, you can write about details, you can explain to them details. Make sure you point out not only the positive, but also the negative and the question form if you are introducing grammar, as we have the positive sentence, the negative sentence, the interrogative sentence. For vocabulary, be sure to give an example sentence so the student can see how it is actually used. So different words, so we can make certain sentences in the class, and then we can ask student to see that how these words are used in particular context. And you know that the meaning of the word is changed when we change the context, right? So obviously this example would help them to understand the multiple meaning of a word. Even though textbooks often have a little chart or whatever, I like to write it up on the board. So it was good when you're teaching grammar, particularly, you can write things on board. For example, I always do this thing in my classes as well. When I'm teaching language classes, so I mostly use that I'm writing something on the board so that all students may see practically things as they are happening over there. I make a chart with almost all these things. So you can obviously use your own strategies as well. The last sentence is very, very important. Keep your learners' need at the forefront here and give them some extra practice with things they may struggle with. Right? For example, I could recall a strategy. I taught a story to my class, and then I give them that, okay, from this story, you're going to point out verbs and pronouns and different parts of speech. So in this way, they not only learn the language, but they were also learning the story as well, the words meaning as well, and then the structure as well, and then different sentences type. So mostly students, obviously all of them not understanding everything, but every student was pointing out different things. So in this way, when collectively those things were happening in the class, it was beneficial for all of them. And then this is the step 4. It's obviously a bit controversial point as well. Pronunciation time in a speaking lesson plan. So in a ESL, right, as a second language, pronunciation is one thing, and then the understanding of the language is another thing, right? So pronunciation drills, they should be like, if you put emphasis on the pronunciation, you are discouraging students, because students are already shy in using their second language. And if you are just too much correcting them or too much emphasis on pronunciation, they may feel hesitant when they speak some word. They may be thinking at that time that either we are doing it right or wrong, and if we speak wrong, then they will become a laughing stock in the class or something like that. So these can be problems. So we should be, as a teacher, we should be like very much lenient in this stance, right? So that's why he says that particularly even when I teach, I hate pronunciation drills, so I don't usually do this section of the lesson plan. However, they can be quite useful some students, and I will pull them out if there is particular problem with a word or two. Sometimes students think they are fun as well, depending on. So you can use this, for example, as like in a lenient way. For example, it would be like uh, directly correcting a students would be dangerous for students' confidence. So for example, you can, by the end of your lesson, you can write some 5 6 words which students mostly have mispronounced, and then you can tell them generally that, well, these words are pronounced in this way. So this would be like this thing. So then the step 5, you could see that at this point, the controlled practice, this is obviously as it is a final step, almost a final step, right? So at this point, obviously you want your students to get some time to use the language. Give them some very controlled practice using the target language, things like fill in the blanks, matching worksheets. Textbooks usually have very good sections related to this for whatever grammar point the chapter is focusing on. Make sure you have some question related to form and some related to meaning. The best one combines the two. Always have students compare answer with a partner before checking together as a class. Often they can catch mistakes at this level instead of just relying on the teacher. Make sure your practice forces the students to use the target language of that lesson. This is obvious, but it is worth mentioning. So this is like obviously controlled practice is sort of thing that whatever you are teaching now, you are going from general to specific, right? So in a specific kind of thing, you can give certain activities, certain exercises, certain matching sheets, all these kind of thing you can do. And students will be, and even give students this chance that they should be correcting each other, because when they should be correcting each other, they are getting it way better than, for example, if teacher is correcting that thing. So by correcting each other, by teaching each other, they're getting this practice, and this is obviously good. And then there is this step number 6, which is freer practice. So uh, once students have the basics down, you can set an activity where they will be able to use the targeted language in a more creative way. Some of favorites ESL speaking exercises are things like surveys, board games, discussion topics, or task-based learning, right? Task-based learning is a very good activity. For example, instead of teaching them, for example, you are going to give a situation and you are going to tell them that how to conduct an interview. So let them in this activity, let them act this task in the class, and we can ask, for example, one student to be the interviewee and the other interviewer, and they can ask different questions and other students can listen it. So in this way, you will working on both skills, listening as well as on speaking, right? And you can obviously, this kind of practice could just take a few minutes or an entire class, as you can just easily go through this. In the next paragraph, you could see teacher may generally circulate around the classroom at this point, eavesdropping on the student. Teacher may carry around a paper and pen and write down the mistakes he hears. He may highlight the ones that he hears more than once with the whole class at the end of activity. So it is like a freer practice, involve all students over there. And then the next is obviously homework. It's optional. You can give some homework, obviously, or you can just done things in the class as well. So this is quickly I have tried to explain this lesson plan if you are going to make in any stage of your class, that how you to conduct this speaking lesson plan. You can obviously add some points into it, and you can also follow this as a general framework, and you can obviously by your own innovation you can make things more better. All right, is it clear to all of you? If you want to ask any question, you can very much ask. I'm stopping this share. Yes. Do you want to ask any question? Or was it clear to all of you?
Yes, sir, it was all clear.
Okay, very good. Anyone else?
Excuse me, sir. Sir, I
Yes.
want to ask something about control practice.
Yes, yes. Ask, please.
Sir, you may tell something more about it.
Control practice is like, obviously, you are being specific now. right? You have set up the context, you have told them the meaning in a general way, and you have like, now you are in a specific activity. You can give, for example, certain activities to students, right? And they have to be like very much specific about the topic, right? If you are working on, as it was a speaking class, lesson plan. So you give them certain activity to speak, and then obviously you can take notes during the class, right? That what are they talking about, what are they, how they are pronouncing the words, what are the mistakes they are doing. So in this way, it will be like a controlled kind of practice, right? Because you're correcting them. In a freer practice, you just ignore their mistakes. In a controlled practice, you try to correct them as well, so that उनका ये ठीक हो जाए. All right, clear?
Okay, sir. Got it. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank
Okay,
you.
good, good. Yes. Anyone else? Very well. I'm ending this session now. So tomorrow we'll be discussing obviously lesson plan for reading skill, right? So you can prepare it, you can read it beforehand, and then we'll be discussing tomorrow. Thank you very much for your presence. Anyone else?
Thank you,
Okay,
sir.
sir. Thank you, sir. Allah
Okay.
Hafiz.
Allah.
Sir.